Syrian desert. Night. The world rendered in shades of green through thermal optics. A figure lay prone behind a rifle, perfectly still, breath controlled to the rhythm of distant artillery. The scope's reticle centered on a man 2,000 meters away, standing beside an armored vehicle, unaware that death watched from the darkness. The voice came low, feminine, barely a whisper against the wind. Directive Alpha 7. Target confirmed. A different voice crackled through the earpiece, urgent mail. Do not engage. Harding is watching. The finger resting on the trigger didn't move. The voice responded, calm as stone. I know. The shot broke the silence. The scope lifted with recoil. The target fell before the sound arrived. Cut to black. 72 hours earlier. The parade ground at Fort Bragg shimmered under Carolina sun, heat rising from asphalt in visible waves. 12 soldiers stood at attention in dress uniforms, their boots mirror bright, their faces carved from discipline and exhaustion. Behind them, bleachers held families, officers, the weight of ceremony pressing down like humidity. Sergeant Rachel Kaine stood third from the left. 26 years old, 5'9", lean as a rifle barrel, she didn't draw the eye. Her uniform showed no wrinkles. Her face showed nothing at all. She'd learned young that survival meant invisibility, that the quietest person in the room was often the most dangerous. Today, graduation day from the Army's advanced sniper course, she maintained that same deadly stillness while cameras flashed and parents wept with pride. The commandant's voice echoed across the grounds. Distinguished honor graduate, Sergeant Rachel Kaine. Polite applause. She stepped forward, accepted the certificate, the handshake, the brief flash of respect in the commandant's eyes. But her attention had already shifted to 3 people in the crowd who weren't clapping. Colonel James Harding stood near the back, arms crossed over a chest thick with muscle and scar tissue. 48 years old, silver threading through dark hair, a face that had seen Fallujah and Kandahar in places that didn't exist on maps. He watched Kaine the way a wolf watches movement in tall grass, calculating, wary. Beside him, a man in civilian clothes, expensive suit, government haircut, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds by design. He held a manila folder against his chest like a shield. The third person sat alone in the top row. Captain Marcus Stone, Alpha Team leader, decorated veteran of Syria and Iraq. His hands gripped the bench edge. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. Kaine noted all 3 in the space between heartbeats, filed the information, returned her attention to the ceremony. Questions could wait. Questions always waited. After the official photos, after the forced smiles and congratulations from classmates who'd never quite trusted her, Colonel Harding called her name. His voice carried the rasp of too many years breathing dust and gunpowder. Sergeant Kaine, to the podium. She moved through the dispersing crowd, boot heels precise on concrete. When she stood before him, he studied her like a medical examiner studies cause of death. Longest confirmed training shot. 1840, 7 meters, sir. Under what conditions? Kaine met his stare without flinching. The ones you said were impossible, sir. The air between them crystallized into something hard and sharp. Around them, conversations died. Harding's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath sun-damaged skin. His eyes, pale gray like winter sky, held hers for 3 full seconds. We'll see if that holds in the field. Dismissed. She saluted. He returned it. The moment ended, but the tension lingered like cordite smoke. The man in the suit materialized at her elbow as she descended the podium steps. He moved with the fluid economy of someone trained in close protection, staying just outside her peripheral vision until he wanted to be seen. When he spoke, his voice carried no accent, no regional markers. the voice of someone who'd learned to be from nowhere. Sergeant Kaine, Director Warren Hayes, Special Activities Division. She stopped, turned. Hayes extended his hand. She shook it once, firmly released. His palm was dry despite the heat. "Your orders," he handed her the manila envelope. "Memorize, burn." Before she could respond, he'd already turned away, vanishing into the crowd with practiced ease. Kaine held the envelope against her side, felt the weight of paper inside. Not many pages, just enough to change everything. The barracks that night smelled of floor wax and old sweat. Kaine sat on her bunk in the darkness, the envelope open on her lap, a small flashlight clenched between her teeth. The orders consisted of 3 pages. No letterhead, no official seal, just dense paragraphs of text and a photograph paper clipped to the final sheet. She read each page twice, the first time for information, the second time to confirm she hadn't misunderstood. Her hands, steady enough to hold crosshairs on a target at 2,000 meters in crosswind, trembled. The photograph showed a man in his 60s. Middle Eastern features, expensive suit, the confident posture of someone used to power. The caption beneath read, "Abdul Nazari, ISIS Financial Network." The text told her this man would be her target within the week, that extraction teams stood ready, that her role was overwatch and termination if required. But there was a second photograph beneath the first, hidden until she pulled the top sheet aside. Same man, different name, different context. This caption read, "Agent Victor Hale, Central Intelligence Agency, Deep Cover Operations." Kaine stared at the 2 photos. Same face, 2 identities. The text beneath explained nothing, just coordinates, timelines, radio frequencies, and at the bottom, a single line in smaller font. Secondary objective: ensure asset extraction, eliminate hostile observation, protect Colonel Harding from compromise at all costs. She read that line 5 times. Protect Harding, the colonel who just dismissed her like faulty equipment, the man who clearly wanted nothing to do with her. The final page made her breath catch. A list of names, 8 of them, all American military, all assigned to various special operations units in the Middle East, all dead within the last 3 years, training accidents, equipment malfunctions, 1 suicide, 1 vehicular collision. At the bottom of that list, a 9th name, Master Sergeant David Kaine, her foster father, the man who taught her to shoot, to think, to survive. Dead 4 years ago when his rifle's firing pin shattered during a live fire exercise, sending shrapnel through his skull. Accidental death the Army had ruled, faulty manufacturing. But this document told a different story. It told her David Kaine had been part of a protective detail, that he'd taken a bullet meant for someone else, that his death had been carefully orchestrated murder disguised as mechanical failure. The name of the man he died protecting sat at the top of the page in bold text. Colonel James Harding. Kaine sat in darkness for a long time after that, the flashlight extinguished, the papers scattered across her blanket. Outside, crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, a drill sergeant shouted at late-night stragglers. The normal sounds of base life, meaningless and far away. She thought about David Kaine, the quiet man who'd fostered her at 12 when no one else would take a damaged kid with a record, who'd taught her patience and precision, who'd never asked about the scars on her back or the nightmares that made her scream, who'd simply shown her how to breathe, how to aim, how to turn pain into focus. "You don't shoot to prove something, Ellie," he'd told her once, using the nickname only he was allowed. "You shoot to connect, feel the distance, let the world align before you move." She'd asked him once why he'd chosen her, this broken girl with dead eyes and clenched fists. He'd smiled, that rare expression that softened his weathered face. "Because you reminded me that some things are worth protecting," he'd said, "even when they don't think they need it." Now, 4 years after his death, she understood. He'd been protecting someone, not her, Harding, and it had cost him everything. Kaine rose from the bunk, carried the papers to the small sink in the corner of the barracks. She held a lighter to each page, watched text curl and blacken, let ash fall into water and dissolve. When nothing remained but gray residue, she washed it down the drain. Then she sat at the small desk, pulled out her personal journal and wrote in careful script, "Day 1. They think I'm just another graduate. They're wrong. This started 4 years ago. It ends when I say it ends." She closed the journal, killed the light, lay back on the bunk with her eyes open. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did. But that was fine. Operators didn't need rest. Syria smelled like burning oil and ancient dust. Kaine stepped off the transport helicopter onto tarmac that shimmered with heat, her rifle case slung across her back, her deployment bag weighing exactly 43 pounds. The forward operating base sprawled across what had once been a commercial airfield, now ringed with HESCO barriers and guard towers, transformed into American territory by sandbags and razor wire. Task Force Phantom occupied the eastern sector. Kaine reported to the Operations Center, a climate-controlled container where maps glowed on screens and radio chatter filled the air with urgent acronyms. Colonel Harding stood at the center of organized chaos, briefing a room full of operators. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence, just continued marking positions on a digital map while Captain Stone pointed at satellite imagery. The target sat 12 kilometers south. A compound on Raqqa's outskirts, 3 buildings arranged in a defensive triangle, walls topped with broken glass and concertina wire. Intelligence suggested 20 to 30 hostiles, mixed ISIS and local militia. Somewhere inside, if the CIA's information held true, Abdul Nazari coordinated financial transfers that kept the Caliphate's war machine running. Harding's voice cut through the room's noise. "HVT extraction. Time on target 0300 tomorrow. Alpha team breaches. Kaine provides overwatch." He finally looked at her then, those winter eyes showing nothing. "Questions?" She stepped forward, studied the imagery. The terrain around the compound offered 3 viable sniper positions. The closest, marked QB-1 in military shorthand, sat 1,600 meters north with clear sightlines to all 3 buildings. Standard choice. Obvious choice. Kaine's finger moved to a different point on the map. "Request QB-2 instead, sir. West Ridge, 1,950 meters." Stone frowned. "QB-1 has better angle of attack. QB-2 has better egress route. If my position is compromised, I need distance." Harding's eyes narrowed fractionally. "You planning to get compromised, Sergeant?" "Planning not to, sir. But terrain favors multiple exit vectors from QB-2. The room went quiet. Operators glanced at each other. Fresh graduate, first deployment, already contradicting the team leader's tactical assessment. This could go badly. Harding studied the map for 10 seconds, then nodded once. "QB-2, prep your gear." The briefing continued without her. Kaine withdrew, found her assigned bunk in the female quarters, began the methodical process of checking equipment. Rifle cleaned and zeroed. Ammunition inspected, each round examined for defects. Optics calibrated. Range cards prepared. The ritual of preparation, the meditation of violence. As her hands moved through familiar motions, her mind turned to the larger puzzle. Harding didn't trust her. That much was obvious. But he'd approved her position change without real argument. That meant either he valued tactical flexibility over ego, or he was testing her, seeing if she'd defer to authority or stand by her judgment. David Kaine had taught her that good leaders tested their people not to break them but to measure their strength. Bad leaders tested people to confirm their own superiority. The question was, which kind was Harding? That night while the base slept, she slipped out, not to QB2, to the armory. The door wasn't locked. Special operations bases ran on trust and accountability. You didn't steal from your brothers in arms. You didn't sabotage equipment. The honor system, enforced by social pressure and the knowledge that lives depended on reliability. Kaine moved through shadows between storage racks, found the demolitions locker, selected what she needed. A small remote transmitter, no larger than a cell phone. A corresponding receiver with magnetic backing. She signed nothing out, left no record, simply took what she required and vanished back into darkness. The classified documents from Hayes had been explicit. Russian GRU observation teams were tracking Task Force Phantom operations, building profiles, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at Harding. The documents Hayes burned into her memory had included satellite imagery of a second building, 400 meters east of tomorrow's target. A building where thermal signatures suggested a three-person team with surveillance equipment. Hayes couldn't tell Harding about this without revealing the larger operation, couldn't brief the team without risking a leak. So the burden fell to Kaine. Protect the colonel without him knowing he needed protection. Eliminate threats he didn't know existed. Operate in the shadows while he operated in the light. At 0200, she was already in position at QB2, 1950 meters from the target compound. But she wasn't looking at the buildings. She was looking at that second location, the structure not marked on any map in the operations center. The building where, 2 hours ago, she'd planted the receiver on the eastern wall. Where Russian operators sat right now, watching through night vision optics, documenting every movement of the American assault team. She held the transmitter, thumb resting on the trigger, and waited. The night passed in increments of breath. Kaine didn't move, didn't shift position. At this distance in darkness against trained opposition, movement meant death. So she became part of the landscape, another shadow among shadows, and let time flow around her like water around stone. Her thoughts drifted to David Kaine, as they often did in moments of stillness. He told her once that waiting was harder than fighting, that any fool could pull a trigger, but it took real discipline to hold fire when every instinct screamed to act. The hardest shot you'll ever take, Ellie, is the one you don't. Remember that. She remembered. 4 years of remembering. 4 years of wondering if she could have saved him if she'd been there. If her skills, her training, her willingness to cross lines others wouldn't, could have made the difference. But she hadn't been there, and he died protecting a man who didn't even remember his name. At 0255, Alpha Team moved into position. 8 operators, heavily armed, approaching the compound from the north using a wadi for concealment. Kaine tracked their progress through her scope, infrared designators visible as pale green fireflies in her optics. At 0300 exactly, the assault began. Breaching charges blew the compound's main gate with a sound like thunder splitting the earth. Flashbangs followed, strobing white light across mud brick walls. Alpha Team poured through the breach, a flood of controlled violence. Kaine's scope centered on the guard tower, 2 hostiles scrambling for weapons. She exhaled halfway, held the rest, let her heartbeat slow to the rhythm of distant eternity. The rifle spoke once, then again. Both targets dropped, their nervous systems shutting down before their brains registered the impacts. Harding's voice came through her earpiece, calm despite the chaos. QB2 status. On target, sir. 2 threats neutralized. Copy, continue overwatch. But Kaine wasn't watching the compound. Her attention had shifted to the unmarked building 400 meters east. Through thermal imaging, 3 figures moved inside. Military posture, weapons ready. One of them raised a rifle, aiming toward Alpha Team's position from a window Alpha couldn't see. She didn't request permission, didn't announce intent, just shifted her aim, calculated the offset for the new angle and fired. The figure in the window jerked backward, weapon clattering. The thermal bloom suggested body armor had stopped the round, but the impact alone would have fractured ribs, stolen breath, eliminated the threat. Harding's voice sharpened. QB2, report, what was that shot? Correcting oversight, sir. What oversight? There's no target at that bearing. Hostile observer, east building, 400 meters from primary. They had angle on Alpha's breach point. Silence on the radio. Then, that building wasn't in the intel brief. I know, sir. More silence. Kaine could hear the unasked question. How did you know it was there? Alpha Team's radio traffic interrupted. Compound secured. Package acquired. Beginning exfil. Kaine watched the target building through her scope. The 2 remaining figures inside were moving, dragging their wounded companion toward a rear exit. She could drop all 3 from here. Easy shots, but her orders said observe and protect, not eliminate. Unless they posed direct threat. One of the figures pulled a radio, began speaking rapidly. The words were inaudible at this distance, but the body language spoke volumes. Urgent, angry, reporting. Kaine's thumb found the transmitter in her pocket. The device Hayes had certainly not authorized her to acquire. The receiver she'd planted on that building's wall, packed with just enough C4 to destroy electronics and communications equipment without bringing down the structure. She pressed the button. The explosion lit the night, a brief orange blossom against darkness. Not large enough to kill, but more than adequate to shred every piece of electronic equipment in that building. Radio, laptops, satellite phones, all reduced to smoking debris. The 3 figures stumbled from the building's rear entrance, coughing, disoriented. They made no attempt to engage Alpha Team, just fled into the darkness, their observation mission thoroughly compromised. Harding's voice came through, and this time it carried an edge she'd never heard before, something between fury and fear. QB2, did you just detonate an explosive device without authorization? Kaine kept her eye to the scope. Negative, sir. Building suffered equipment malfunction, likely faulty wiring. A pause that stretched 10 seconds. Then, extract to Rally Point Charlie. We're having a conversation. Copy, sir. But as Kaine began breaking down her position, preparing to displace, something in the compound's shadows moved wrong. A figure, running not toward the breach point but away from it. Running with the purpose of someone who knew exactly where to go. She zoomed her optics, tracked the movement. Saw Alpha Team emerging from the main building with a hooded prisoner. Saw Stone directing his men toward the exfil point. Saw the running figure reach the compound's southern wall, produce what looked like a radio, begin speaking rapidly. Kaine made a decision that would change everything. She fired. The running figure dropped. Stone's voice erupted over the radio. Contact south, who's shooting? Kaine, hostile attempting to alert reinforcements. Stone deployed 2 operators to check the body. Seconds later, it's a kid, maybe 15, no weapon. Kaine's blood went cold. Her optics had shown a radio, but at 2,000 meters in darkness through thermal imaging, a radio and a cell phone looked identical, and a 15-year-old running from combat wasn't necessarily a combatant. She just killed a child. No, she replayed the image in her mind. The posture had been military, the movement purposeful, the object definitely a communications device. But doubt once planted grew roots. Stone's voice again, negative on radio. Kid's got a phone, looks like he was just running away. Kaine closed her eyes, opened them, made her voice steady. Thermal signature showed object in hand, hostile posture, made the call. Harding's voice cut through. All units extract. Now, Stone, grab the kid's phone. We'll sort this at base. The helicopters came in low and fast, rotors beating the air into submission. Alpha Team loaded up, prisoner secured, and lifted off into darkness. Kaine had already displaced from QB2, moving through a route she'd memorized during mission planning, arriving at Rally Point Charlie as the last bird settled onto the landing zone. She climbed aboard without meeting anyone's eyes. Strapped in, the helicopter rose, banking hard, racing toward the relative safety of the forward operating base. No one spoke to her during the flight. Stone sat across the cabin, his face unreadable behind night vision goggles. The hooded prisoner sat between two operators, completely still, and somewhere in Kaine's pocket, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The doubt wasn't about the shot itself. At that distance, with that information, any operator would have made the same call. The doubt was about whether she'd wanted to believe the target was hostile because it simplified things, because shooting a combatant was easier than watching Alpha Team get ambushed, because protecting Harding mattered more than protecting the truth. David Kaine had warned her about this. The moment when you stop questioning your decisions is the moment you become dangerous to everyone, including yourself. The base's landing pad smelled like jet fuel and sand. Kaine stepped off the helicopter, rifle case across her back, and found Colonel Harding waiting. Not in the operations center, not in any official capacity, just standing on the tarmac, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "Walk with me, Sergeant." They moved away from the landing zone, past HESCO barriers and guard posts, toward a section of perimeter where light didn't reach. When they were alone, Harding stopped, turned, looked at her with those winter eyes. "Explain now." Kaine met his stare. "Sir, I engaged multiple threats, neutralized hostile observers, prevented compromise of Alpha Team's position. The East Building wasn't in our intelligence brief. How did you know about it?" "I saw it during pre-mission imagery analysis." "Bullshit." Harding's voice stayed level, but a vein pulsed in his temple. "That building doesn't appear on any satellite photos in our database. You had different intelligence. From who?" Kaine calculated her options. Lie and risk exposure. Tell truth and risk everything else. She chose truth. Director Hayes, Special Activities Division. Harding's jaw tightened. "Hayes? I don't have anyone named Hayes in my chain of command." "He's not in your chain, sir. He's in mine." The colonel took one step closer. When he spoke, his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Are you telling me you deployed to my area of operations with a separate set of orders?" "Secondary objectives, sir, that don't conflict with primary mission." "And those objectives are?" "Ensure extraction of the package, eliminate threats to the mission." She paused. "Protect your position from compromise." Harding's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "My position." "Yes, sir." "From who?" Kaine pulled her tactical tablet from its pouch, called up an encrypted file Hayes had embedded in her orders, turned the screen toward Harding. "Russian GRU, Directorate 13. They've been tracking you for 3 years." The colonel stared at the screen, at the photographs, at his own face in a dozen different locations across 3 continents, at the red X marks through the faces of men standing beside him in those photos. At the dates, all within the last 36 months, all dead now. His voice came out rough. These are my people. Were, sir. Every person marked in those photos died within 6 months. Training accidents, equipment failures, one suicide. Your weapons sergeant, Master Sergeant David Kaine, died 4 years ago when his rifle's firing pin exploded. Harding looked up sharply. Kaine, you're related. Foster daughter, sir. He raised me after my parents died. And you think his death was? Not an accident, sir. He was part of your protective detail. Someone swapped his firing pin with a faulty one. He died, you lived, but you were the target. The colonel was quiet for a long time. Around them the base hummed with activity. Generators thrummed. Radio chatter drifted from the operations center. Normal sounds of war suddenly rendered meaningless. Harding's mind worked through the implications. Years of experience processing tactical intelligence. If David Kaine had been protecting him, that meant someone in the chain of command had access to personnel files, training schedules, equipment rosters. Someone high enough to orchestrate deaths across multiple units and theaters. Someone patient enough to wait years between strikes to avoid pattern detection. Why didn't Hayes brief me directly? Because you're the target, sir. If you knew you were bait, you'd act differently. Change patterns. They need you behaving naturally. Harding's hands flexed into fists. So I'm what? Tethered goat. You're protected, sir. That's my job. And the kid tonight, was that protection? Kaine felt the words hit like physical blows, but she kept her voice steady. I reviewed the thermal footage, sir. He was carrying a radio, military frequency. Someone planted him as a failsafe observer. Stone examined the body, said it was a phone. Could have been both, sir. Could have been neither. Could have been exactly what it looked like, an innocent kid running for his life. The truth sat between them like an unexploded bomb. Harding looked at her for a long moment, and something changed in his expression. Not softening, exactly, but recognition. He'd made similar calls in his career. Decisions based on incomplete information where hesitation meant death and action meant carrying the weight forever. The prisoner, the one we extracted, that's not Abdul Nazari. No, sir. It's this Agent Hale, the CIA asset. Yes, sir. The whole mission was a rescue operation disguised as an HVT strike. Primary objective was extraction, sir. Everything else was secondary, including the Russian observers in that east building. They had angle on Alpha Team, thermal imaging, range-finding equipment. If I hadn't eliminated their communications, they'd have called in your position. You'd have been ambushed on exfil. How do you know they were Russian? Because their equipment signature matched GRU standard issue. Because they displaced using Spetsnaz tactical doctrine. Because I've been studying them for 4 years, sir, ever since they killed my father. Harding rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion and something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. You should have told me. I'm telling you now, sir. After the fact doesn't count, Sergeant. It does when telling you before would have compromised the mission, when it would have changed your behavior in ways that could have gotten you killed. The colonel looked up at the stars, barely visible through dust and light pollution. So what now? You're my guardian angel. Until the threat is neutralized, sir. And if the threat never gets neutralized, if this is just my life now, looking over my shoulder, wondering who's going to die next because of me. Kaine thought about David Kaine, about the quiet man who'd taken a broken girl and shown her how to be strong, who died so this colonel could keep breathing. Then you keep breathing, sir. You keep leading, you keep doing the job, and I'll keep making sure you survive to do it." Harding looked at her, really looked for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Bragg. What he saw seemed to surprise him. "You're not what I expected." "Good, sir, neither are they." They stood in silence after that, two soldiers under foreign stars, surrounded by the machinery of war. Finally, Harding spoke. "Hayes, I want to talk to him." "He doesn't take unsecured calls, sir." "Then we make it secured. Because if I'm bait in someone's trap, I want to know the whole plan. Not just the part where I smile for the cameras and hope your bullets fly true." Kaine nodded. "I'll arrange it, but sir, one thing you need to understand." "What?" "They chose me for this assignment for a reason. Not because I'm the best shot, not because I'm invisible. They chose me because David Kaine trained me, because he taught me everything he knew about protecting people who didn't think they needed it, and because when he died he left me one mission: keep James Harding alive. That's what I'm doing. That's all I'm doing." Harding's expression softened fractionally. "Did he know me? Your foster father?" "You trained together. Advanced Infantry School, Fort Benning, 1998. He said you were the best natural shooter he'd ever seen. Said you had a gift." "I don't remember him." "Most people didn't, sir. That's what made him good at his job." The colonel nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make sure his sacrifice wasn't wasted." They walked back toward the operations center together, two figures among many, indistinguishable from the general flow of personnel. But something had shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. Recognition that they were both pieces on a board neither fully understood, playing a game whose rules kept changing. Inside the operations center, Stone was waiting. The prisoner sat in a corner, hood removed now, revealed as a man in his 40s with American features and weary eyes. Agent Hale, if the intelligence was accurate, extracted from deep cover at enormous risk. Stone approached Harding. "Sir, we need to discuss what happened on that operation." "Later, Captain. First, I need to make a phone call." "Sir, Sergeant Kaine's actions were irregular at best. The unauthorized shots, the explosive device, the civilian casualty." "I said later." Harding's voice carried parade ground authority. Stone's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Kaine moved to a computer terminal, pulled up the encrypted communication system Hayes had provided, entered the access codes from memory, waited. The screen flickered. Director Warren Hayes appeared, his face rendered in pixels, background deliberately neutral. "Sergeant Kaine, making your introduction." "Colonel Harding wanted to speak with you directly, sir." Hayes's expression didn't change. "Put him on." Kaine stepped aside. Harding leaned toward the camera. "Director Hayes, I'm told you've been running an operation using my command as cover without briefing me." "Correct." "That's a violation of protocol. So is leaving a decorated colonel exposed to foreign assassination without adequate protection. I chose the lesser violation." Harding's hands gripped the desk edge. "My people are dying." "Your people were already dead, Colonel. We're just trying to keep you from joining them. And perhaps, if Sergeant Kaine is as skilled as her foster father believed, we might neutralize the threat entirely." "David Kaine, you knew him." "Knew him well. One of the best protective operators I ever worked with. When he died, I made him a promise: take care of his daughter, make sure his sacrifice meant something. This assignment is me keeping that promise." Harding looked back at Kaine standing silent beside the terminal, then back to Hayes. "She killed a kid tonight. Maybe a combatant, maybe not. That weighs on people. She'll carry it, same way you carry Chechnya, same way I carry Beirut. We all carry something, Colonel. The question is whether we carry it forward or let it bury us. And you think she's strong enough? I think she's David Kaine's daughter. That's answer enough. The connection terminated. Harding straightened, looked around the operations center at the maps and screens and the controlled chaos of military operations. At Stone, waiting with barely contained frustration. At Agent Hale, the extracted asset who'd cost so much to recover. At Kaine, standing quiet and still, an operator in human form. Captain Stone, with me. We need to debrief the prisoner. What about Kaine, sir? What about her? Her actions tonight require investigation, potential charges. Harding paused at the door, turned back. Sergeant Kaine operated under separate orders from higher authority. Her actions, while irregular, prevented compromise of our position and ensured mission success. No charges, no investigation. She did her job. End of discussion. Stone's face flushed. Sir, I must respectfully object. End of discussion, Captain. Harding left. Stone glared at Kaine for a long moment, then followed. The operations center returned to its normal rhythm, personnel focused on their tasks, the brief drama already fading into background noise. Kaine stood alone, surrounded by activity that flowed around her like water around Stone. She thought about the 15-year-old boy, about whether his phone had been just a phone or something more, about whether she'd saved lives tonight or taken one that didn't need taking. The doubt would live with her, same as all the other doubts, all the other decisions made in fractions of seconds with incomplete information. The burden of the trigger, David Kaine had called it. The weight every shooter carries when the bullet leaves the barrel and consequences become irreversible. She left the operations center, walked across the compound to her quarters. Inside, she pulled out her journal, wrote in careful script, "First mission complete. Harding knows now." But knowing isn't the same as understanding. The real test comes next, when he has to decide, does he trust the operator his friend sent to protect him? Or does he do what instinct says and push me away? Outside, dawn broke over Syria, painting the sky in shades of bronze and blood. Another day in a war that never seemed to end. Another morning of checking weapons and planning violence. The rhythm of combat, familiar and terrible. Kaine cleaned her rifle, each motion precise, each component inspected and reassembled. The meditation of maintenance, the ritual that separated professional from amateur. When she finished, the weapon gleamed like dark water, perfect and lethal. She lay back on her bunk, eyes open, mind churning through scenarios and contingencies. Somewhere in this base or beyond it, Russian intelligence officers were recalibrating their plans. Somewhere, decisions were being made about how to proceed now that their observation post had been compromised. And somewhere, a boy's body was being prepared for burial. A child who might have been innocent, who might have been a plant, who would never get the chance to prove which. Kaine closed her eyes, saw his thermal signature in her mind, running, always running, toward safety or toward a mission she'd never know for certain. That uncertainty would haunt her, but she'd learned to live with shadows. She'd learned from the best. The Syrian sun turned the operations center into an oven by noon. Sweat pooled under body armor, evaporated, left salt stains on desert camouflage. Rachel Kaine sat in the corner of the briefing room, cleaning her rifle for the third time that day, the repetitive motion a meditation against the thoughts that wanted to surface. The boy's face, the thermal signature, the decision made in fractions of seconds that couldn't be unmade. Colonel Harding stood at the front of the room, addressing the assembled operators. Alpha Team sat in the front row, Captain Stone's posture rigid with barely contained tension. The extracted asset, Agent Victor Hale, sat to one side, looking like a man who'd spent too long in places humans weren't meant to survive. Harding's voice carried the weight of command and something newer, sharper. The awareness that every word might be his last if the wrong person was listening. Intelligence indicates our operations have been compromised. Russian GRU has maintained observation on this base for an estimated 6 days. As of last night's action, their primary observation post has been neutralized. Stone raised his hand. Sir, how do we know the intelligence is accurate? The source wasn't in our original briefing package. Because the source has kept me alive for the last 3 years without my knowledge. Harding's eyes swept the room. Because people I trusted, people who served beside me, are dead. Training accidents that weren't accidents. Equipment failures that were sabotage. Someone wants me isolated, paranoid, and eventually dead. That someone has resources, patience, and people inside our own structure. The room went silent. Operators exchanged glances. The implications settled like fallout. Captain Stone, Lieutenant Shaw, Sergeant Wade, Corporal Vick, front and center. 4 men stood. Kaine watched their faces, reading micro-expressions, the tiny tells that separated guilt from innocence. Stone looked confused. Shaw appeared calm. Wade seemed angry. Vick showed nothing at all. Harding continued. You 4 have the skills, access, and opportunity to be the insider threat we're looking for. Sniper qualification, intelligence clearance, communications access, weapons handling. One of you, or more than one, is feeding information to Russian intelligence. Stone's face flushed red. Sir, this is outrageous. I've served under you for 6 years. And Marcus Hale served with me for 8 before someone put a bullet in his spine and made it look like a hunting accident. Time in service doesn't equal loyalty, Captain. Not anymore. Harding pulled up a satellite image on the main screen. This is the compound we hit last night. Here's the building that wasn't in your briefing packages. The one housing Russian observers with direct line of sight to our breach point. The one that somehow exploded moments before they could call in our position. His finger moved across the map. Only 4 people on this base knew our exact movement timeline and breach point coordinates. Me, Stone, Shaw, and the operations officer who input the plan. That officer is in a medically induced coma in Germany after his vehicle rolled over 3 days ago. Brake line failure. Shaw spoke for the first time, his voice level. Sir, if you suspect us, why tell us? Why not investigate quietly? Because quiet investigations take time we don't have. Because whoever the mole is, they've already reported last night's compromise. Their handlers are adapting, changing plans, and because I want them to know we're coming. Kaine stood, rifle slung across her back. Sir, request permission to speak. Granted. She moved to the front of the room, pulled out her tactical tablet, connected it to the main display. On screen appeared photographs, Harding at a dozen locations. Red X marks through faces of men standing beside him. These are confirmed kills, assassinations disguised as accidents over a 36-month period. Every target had 3 things in common. They served with Colonel Harding. They knew about Chechnya 2011, and they died before they could connect the pattern. Stone stared at the screen. Chechnya, sir, that was 13 years ago. And someone's still killing to keep it quiet. Kaine advanced the slides. In Chechnya, Colonel Harding's unit eliminated a high-value target, General Volkov's son, Dmitry. The official report said he was a military officer coordinating insurgent operations. The classified report, the one 3 people had access to, said something different. She pulled up a scanned document, Cyrillic text with English translation beneath. Dmitry Volkov wasn't just military. He was a courier. These are the documents Colonel Harding recovered from his body. Chemical weapons transfer agreements. American signatures authorizing sale of prohibited materials to Russian intermediaries who then sold them to Syrian government forces. Signatures from people who are now very powerful, people who would do anything to keep this buried. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Harding raised his hand for silence. Sergeant Kaine is correct. I recovered those documents, turned them over to my chain of command. Was told they were classified above my clearance and to never speak of them again. I followed orders, went back to work, didn't ask questions, but someone somewhere decided the people who knew about those documents were liabilities. They've been cleaning house for over a decade. I'm one of the last names on the list. Wade spoke, his voice rough. Sir, if this is true, why are we still in Syria? Why not pull back, go public, expose the whole thing? Because going public gets us labeled conspiracy theorists or traitors. Because the people behind this have resources we can't match. And because the moment we break radio silence on this topic, everyone in this room becomes a target. Harding's expression hardened. Our only play is to identify the mole, trace the network backwards, and cut the head off this snake before it strikes again. Kaine advanced to the next slide. We have a narrow window, 48 hours. Russian intelligence will be scrambling to replace their observation post, adjust their timeline, activate backup assets. During that window, they'll be communicating more than usual. More traffic means more chances to intercept, identify, and track. How do we do that? Shaw asked. We set a trap. Kaine looked at Harding. The colonel becomes bait. 3 hours later, after the briefing dissolved into mission planning and the operations center became a hive of focused activity, Kaine found herself alone with Harding in the secure communications room. The space was barely large enough for 2 people, lined with soundproofing and equipped with encryption gear that cost more than most people's houses. Harding sat heavily in one of the 2 chairs. You're asking me to trust you with my life. I'm telling you I've been doing that for 3 years without asking permission. He smiled without humor. Fair point, walk me through it again, the whole plan. Kaine pulled up schematics on the terminal. We leak false information to each suspect individually, different details for each one. Whichever piece of intel gets transmitted to Russian handlers tells us who the mole is. And if more than one piece gets transmitted, then we have multiple moles. She met his eyes. Sir, I need to be direct. Captain Stone has been acting irregular since before I arrived. Lieutenant Shaw speaks fluent Russian, which is useful but also convenient. Sergeant Wade controls all weapons maintenance and could sabotage equipment in his sleep. Corporal Vic handles communications and could hide transmissions in regular traffic without anyone noticing. Any of them could be clean. Or all of them could be compromised. Kaine pulled up personnel files. Stone served in Chechnya. Different unit, different timeline, but he was there. Shaw did a tour with Defense Intelligence Agency before transferring to Special Operations. Wade's background check shows a cousin who immigrated from Moscow in 2008. Vic has no red flags at all, which in itself is suspicious. Harding rubbed his face. So we trust no one. We trust each other, and we trust that whoever killed David Kaine made a mistake leaving me alive. The colonel looked up. Your foster father, Hayes, said he was one of the best. He was. Kaine's voice stayed level, but something moved behind her eyes. He taught me that protection isn't about standing between the bullet and the target. It's about making sure the bullet never gets fired, about seeing 3 moves ahead, about becoming invisible until the moment you're not. Harding was quiet for a moment. Then, he died for me, you know that. Someone meant to kill me and he took the hit. I know. And you don't blame me. Kaine thought about David Kaine, about the quiet man who'd shown a broken girl how to breathe, how to aim, how to turn pain into precision, who'd never asked for gratitude or recognition, who'd simply done the job because it needed doing. He made a choice, sir. Same choice I'm making now. The only difference is I'm not planning to die for you. I'm planning to kill anyone who tries. The hint of a smile touched Harding's weathered face. You remind me of someone I knew, long time ago. Who? Harding stood, moved to the door. Doesn't matter. She's dead now too. This job has a way of eating the best people and leaving the mediocre ones behind. You're still here, sir. Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if that makes me best or mediocre. He left before Kaine could respond. She sat alone in the comm room, surrounded by encryption gear and the low hum of electronics, and thought about the trap they were setting, about the variables she couldn't control, about the mathematics of survival when the equation kept changing. Night fell over the Syrian desert like a curtain dropping on a stage. The forward operating base transformed under darkness, lights dimmed to red for night vision compatibility, guard rotations shifting to elevated alert status. Kaine moved through shadows between buildings, an operator among operators, heading toward her objective. The communications tower rose 30 meters above the compound, bristling with antennas and satellite dishes. At its base, a small equipment building housed the gear that connected this isolated outpost to the rest of the American military machine. One guard stood outside, rotating every 4 hours, changed at random intervals to prevent pattern recognition. Kaine had been watching the rotation for 6 hours. She knew the guard's name, knew he smoked on the hour, always facing away from the door for the 30 seconds it took to light up and take 3 drags. Knew he checked his phone every 20 minutes, scrolling through photos from home, his face illuminated by pale blue light. She waited in the darkness 20 meters away, prone on gravel, rifle beside her, breathing measured and slow. The guard pulled out his cigarette pack, turned away from the door, flicked his lighter. Kaine moved. 30 seconds. That's all she had. She crossed the distance in 20, footfalls silent on packed earth, her body low and flowing like water. The door's lock was electronic, requiring a code. She'd watched 3 different operators enter over the past hours, memorized the finger movements, triangulated the likely numbers. First attempt, wrong code, the panel blinked red. 25 seconds. Second attempt, the lock clicked green. She slipped inside, closed the door softly, found herself in a space filled with server racks and blinking lights. The ventilation system hummed, covering any small sound she might make. 15 seconds. She pulled a device from her pocket, no larger than a USB drive. Hayes had provided it along with instructions she'd memorized and then burned. Plug it into any active terminal. It'll do the rest. The nearest terminal sat beneath the main console, cables running in organized chaos. Kaine found the port, inserted the device, heard the soft click of connection. 5 seconds. The device's LED blinked once, green, active, transmitting. 0 seconds. Kaine was already moving, retracing her path, slipping out the door as the guard turned back from his smoke break. She melted into darkness, became part of the shadows, and was gone before he'd finished grinding out his cigarette. Back in her quarters, she activated a secondary tablet Hayes had provided. The screen showed nothing for 30 seconds. Then data began scrolling. Intercepts. Communications traffic flowing through the base's network, all of it being copied, analyzed, routed to wherever Hayes's people worked their magic. A message appeared at the bottom of the screen. Device active, we're listening, maintain protocol. Kaine typed a response. Phase 1 complete, standing by for Phase 2. The reply came instantly. Negative. Phase 2 delayed. New intel suggests timeline accelerated. Volkov moving assets into theater faster than anticipated. Recommend immediate lockdown of all suspects. Kaine stared at the screen. That wasn't the plan. The plan was controlled leaks, careful observation, patient tracking. Lockdown meant showing their hand before they'd identified the threat. She typed, recommend maintaining original timeline. Lockdown risks alerting mole before identification. The response took longer this time. Request denied. This comes from higher than me. Volkov knows his observation post was burned. He's accelerating endgame. Estimates 72 hours before direct action against Harding. We can't wait. Kaine's jaw tightened. New orders. Maintain close protection on Harding. Trust no one. Prepare for imminent contact. The connection terminated. Kaine sat in darkness, turning over scenarios in her mind. If Volkov was accelerating, that meant desperation. Desperate people made mistakes, but they also made bold moves that caught careful planners off guard. She checked her rifle, loaded a fresh magazine, slid her sidearm from its holster, press-checked the chamber, returned it to leather. The ritual of preparation, the meditation before combat. Outside, the base continued its normal operations. Soldiers rotated guard posts. Helicopters came and went. The machinery of war ground forward, indifferent to individual fates. Kaine closed her eyes, thought about David Kaine's last words, caught on the hidden camera he'd planted in his quarters before the mission that killed him. The video Hayes had shown her 3 years ago, the one that started this whole path. Ellie, David Kaine had said, his face already showing the illness that would claim him after the rifle malfunction, the injuries that would prove fatal despite the best medical care. If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you need to know why. Colonel Harding carries information that powerful people want buried. I've been protecting him for 6 years, but if they got me, they'll try again. Find Director Hayes. Tell him Protocol Shadow is active. Tell him you're ready. And Ellie, don't cry for me. I died doing exactly what I was meant to do. The video had ended there. Kaine had been 22, fresh out of Ranger School, certain she understood sacrifice and duty. She'd been wrong. Understanding came later, with time and distance, with the slow recognition that some people chose to stand between the darkness and the light not for glory or recognition, but because someone had to. Now she was that someone, and the darkness was closing in faster than anyone had planned. The knock on her door came at 0200, sharp and urgent. Kaine was already awake, had been for hours, cleaning weapons and reviewing contingency plans. She answered with her sidearm in hand, held low and ready. Harding stood in the corridor, still dressed, his face drawn. We have a problem. She stepped aside. He entered, closed the door, checked to make sure they were alone. Agent Hale is missing. Kaine felt ice run down her spine. Missing how? He was in secure holding. 2 guards armed with orders to shoot anyone who tried to approach without clearance. At 01:15, both guards reported feeling dizzy. By 01:30, they were unconscious. Medics are working on them now, but preliminary assessment suggests some kind of fast-acting sedative. When they came to 10 minutes ago, Hale was gone. How many people knew his location? Harding pulled out a list. 17. Command staff, medical personnel, the guards themselves, and the 4 suspects. Stone, Shaw, Wade, and Vic. All 4 had legitimate reasons to know. All 4 were on duty during the window when Hale disappeared. Kaine holstered her weapon, grabbed her tactical vest. We need to lock down the base. Full accountability. Nobody moves until we find him. Already done. Harding's expression was grim, but here's the thing, we found evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that points directly at you. The words hit like a physical blow. Kaine went very still. Explain. One of the guards, before he lost consciousness, saw a figure approaching. Small build, moving like a trained operator. He assumed it was one of our female support staff until she got close. Then he said she moved differently, like a shadow. That describes half the special operations community. He also said she was carrying an M110, your weapon's signature. Kaine's mind raced through possibilities. Someone trying to frame her. Someone who knew her weapon's preferences. Someone inside the base with access to intelligence about her role. Sir, I was in my quarters from 2300 until you knocked 2 minutes ago. No witnesses, no alibi, but also no opportunity to infiltrate a secure facility and extract a prisoner. I know, Harding's voice carried a weight she'd never heard before, but Stone doesn't. And right now he's calling for your arrest. Says you're the mole, says everything points to you. Russian-trained sniper, separate chain of command, unauthorized actions in the field. He's building a case and he's got people listening. How many people? Enough. The colonel moved to her small window, looked out at the darkened base. I bought you time by insisting on personal interrogation before any arrest. But Kaine, if we don't find Hale and prove your innocence in the next 6 hours, I won't be able to protect you. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling, and in a combat zone, circumstantial is often enough. Kaine felt the trap closing. Elegant, really. Take out Hale, frame her, remove Harding's protection in one move. Whoever planned this understood psychology, leverage, timing. The mole isn't one of the 4 suspects, she said slowly. It's someone we haven't considered. Someone with access to intelligence about me, about Hale, about the whole operation. Someone who could move freely enough to drug 2 guards and extract a prisoner without raising immediate alarm. Harding turned from the window. You have someone in mind. Not yet, but I will. She grabbed her rifle, began loading magazines. Sir, I need you to trust me for the next 6 hours. Don't tell anyone where I'm going. Don't confirm or deny anything Stone says. Just give me time to find Hale and identify the real mole. And if you can't, then you let Stone arrest me. We play it out, see who makes the next move. That's not a plan, that's suicide. Kaine met his eyes. It's what David Kaine would do. Sometimes the only way to draw out a snake is to look like prey. Harding was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. 6 hours. After that, I can't hold them off. Understood, sir. She moved to the door, paused. One more thing. When this goes sideways, and it will, remember, I'm not the enemy. I'm just the only one willing to operate in the shadows to protect you. She left before he could respond, slipping into the darkness between buildings, her mind already calculating angles and possibilities. The base was on lockdown, which meant limited movement, heightened security, every person accountable to someone else. Perfect conditions for hiding in plain sight. Kaine had learned urban tracking from David Kaine, who'd learned it from 2 decades of hunting insurgents through cities that didn't want to be pacified. The principle was simple. People moved in patterns, even when trying not to. Everyone had habits, preferences, unconscious behaviors that betrayed their presence. She started at the secure holding facility. The 2 guards were gone, evacuated to medical. The area was cordoned off with tape and a single military police officer standing watch. Kaine approached from the shadows, observed without being seen. The guard was young, maybe 23, nervous. He checked his phone every 90 seconds, shifted weight from foot to foot. Amateur mistakes, but understandable. This was probably his first real security incident. Kaine circled the building, examining approaches. The front door was obvious, 2 exposed. Side entrances were locked, required key cards, but the roof access, a maintenance ladder behind a dumpster, showed fresh scuff marks on the rungs. Someone had climbed recently. Someone light enough not to leave deep impressions, but heavy enough to disturb the dust. She climbed. The roof was flat, scattered with HVAC equipment and solar panels. At the far end, a ventilation shaft showed signs of tampering. The grate had been removed, set aside carefully, replaced but not secured. Kaine pulled it free. The shaft dropped 3 meters to a horizontal duct that ran the length of the building. Tight space, uncomfortable, but navigable for someone small and motivated. She dropped in. The duct was barely wider than her shoulders, forcing her to crawl on her stomach, pushing her rifle ahead of her. The metal amplified every sound, turning breathing into thunder, movement into screaming. She forced herself to slow down, to move with glacial patience, one elbow's length at a time. The duct branched. Left led toward the main holding cells. Right led toward administrative offices. She paused, thinking. If you just extracted a high-value prisoner, where would you take him? Not out of the base, not during lockdown. Too risky. But somewhere secure enough to conduct interrogation, isolated enough to avoid detection. The administrative wing. After hours, mostly empty. Offices with locks that could be bypassed. Soundproofing for classified discussions. Kaine went right. The duct terminated at another grate. Through the metal slats she could see a hallway dimly lit, empty. She listened, heard voices. 2 people, conversation too low to make out words, but the rhythm suggested interrogation. Question, pause, question, longer pause. She eased the grate free, millimeter by millimeter, until she could slide it aside. Dropped into the hallway, rifle up, every sense screaming alert. The voices came from the 3rd door on the left. Office of the base logistics officer, currently deployed elsewhere. The door was closed, but light leaked from the gap beneath. Kaine approached with the patience of deep water. Each step placed precisely, weight distributed, breathing silent. At the door she paused, pulled out her phone, activated the camera, slid it under the door gap at floor level. The image that appeared on screen froze her blood. Agent Hale sat in a chair, hands zip-tied, blood running from his nose. Standing over him was Captain Marcus Stone, sleeves rolled up, knuckles already showing the evidence of impact. And behind Stone, leaning against a desk with arms crossed, was Lieutenant Shaw. Stone's voice came through clearly now. "Last chance, Hale. Who else knows about the Chechnya documents? Who did Harding tell?" Hale's response was thick with blood. "I don't know what you're talking about." Stone hit him again, a professional strike to the solar plexus that stole breath without causing permanent damage. Shaw watched without expression. "We know you're CIA. We know you were inserted to make contact with Harding. We know someone's been feeding you information about the chemical weapons transfers. Just tell us who, and this ends." Hale spat blood. "You're going to kill me anyway." Stone smiled, "Probably. But how we kill you depends entirely on your cooperation. Quick and clean, or slow and messy." Kaine pulled back her phone, mind racing. Stone and Shaw, working together. That explained the coordinated movements, the way they'd supported each other's alibis. But it also meant the other 2, Wade and Vic, were either clean or part of a larger cell. She had to assume larger cell, safer assumption. 4 against 1, in a confined space, with a prisoner to protect. The mathematics didn't favor survival. But David Kaine had taught her that mathematics lied when it didn't account for will. Kaine pulled a flashbang from her vest, primed it, took 3 deep breaths, let her heartbeat slow to the rhythm of deep ocean. Then she kicked the door open and threw the grenade in one fluid motion. The flashbang detonated with a sound like the universe splitting. White light strobed, brighter than magnesium, turning vision into negative space. Stone and Shaw reacted instantly, training overriding shock, both dropping and drawing weapons. But Kaine was already moving. She came through the door low and fast, rifle up, putting 2 rounds into Stone's weapon hand before he could aim. The captain screamed, pistol clattering. Shaw was faster, better trained, brought his rifle up and fired. The rounds went wide by inches. Kaine rolled left, came up behind Hale's chair, using the prisoner as cover. Not ideal, tactically questionable, but necessary. "Shaw, don't shoot." Stone's voice pain-edged but commanding. "We need her alive." Kaine processed that. They needed her alive, which meant orders from higher up, which meant she had leverage. She put her rifle's muzzle against the back of Hale's head. Everyone freezes or the CIA man dies. Shaw's rifle stayed up, aimed at her center mass. "You won't kill him. You're here to extract him." "True, but you don't know that for certain. And uncertainty makes people hesitate." Stone struggled to his feet, cradling his ruined hand. Blood dripped between his fingers. "You just shot a superior officer. That's 20 years in Leavenworth. You just kidnapped and tortured a federal agent. That's treason." Kaine's voice stayed level. "We can compare sentences later." Shaw spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an accent she'd never heard before. Faint. "Russian. You're good, Sergeant. Better than we expected, but you're alone. We have this building surrounded. You have nowhere to go." "Then I guess we wait here, until someone with more authority arrives." "That someone would be me." The new voice came from the doorway. Kaine's eyes flicked right, saw Corporal Vic standing there with a rifle aimed at her head. Behind him, Sergeant Wade. 4 against 1, mathematics catching up. Kaine smiled without humor. The whole team, impressive recruitment. Wade shrugged. "Money talks. Russians pay better than Uncle Sam." "How much?" Kaine asked, calculating angles, distances, probabilities. "What's the price for betraying everyone you served with?" Wade's face darkened. "Don't lecture me about service. I did 3 tours in this place. Lost friends, got injured, came home to a country that didn't care. Russians offered me a future. America offered me therapy and a disability check. So you chose treason." "I chose survival." Wade gestured with his rifle. "Now drop your weapon. Slow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Kaine's mind raced through scenarios. 4 weapons trained on her. Hale bleeding and semi-conscious. No backup, no clear exit. The mathematics screamed surrender. But mathematics didn't account for the device she'd planted in the communications tower. The device transmitting every electronic signal on this base to Hayes's analysts. The device that had certainly captured Stone's interrogation, Shaw's Russian accent, all of it. Help was coming. She just needed to survive long enough for it to arrive. She lowered her rifle slowly, set it on the floor, raised her hands. "Smart choice," Stone said. "Vic, secure her." Vic moved forward, zip ties in hand. As he reached for her wrists, Kaine spoke. "Question. When Volkov ordered you to eliminate Harding, did he tell you why? Or did you just follow orders like good little traitors?" Stone's expression flickered. "Shut up." "Because I know why. I know about Chechnya, about Dmitry Volkov, about the chemical weapons transfers. I know all of it. And so does Director Hayes. And so does every analyst who's been monitoring this base's communications for the past 6 hours." The room went very still. Shaw's rifle lowered fractionally. "What?" Kaine smiled. "The device in the communications tower. You thought it was yours, didn't you? Thought you'd hidden your transmitter so well, but Hayes planted a second device. A listener. Everything you've said, everything you've transmitted, it's all recorded. You're finished. Stone's face went pale. You're lying. Am I? Check your equipment. Check the logs. See if there's a device you don't recognize. Vic pulled out a tablet, fingers flying across the screen. His expression changed. There's a second transmitter, active, sending data to. I can't trace the endpoint. Military encryption I don't recognize. Shaw swore in Russian. A long, creative string of profanity that confirmed every suspicion Kaine had harbored. Stone looked at his team, then at Kaine, then at the door. We need to move. Now, grab Hale and the girl. We extract to the backup position, contact Volkov, figure this out. And go where? Kaine asked. This base is locked down, you're trapped. We have an exit strategy. Stone's confidence was returning. Did you really think we'd operate without contingencies? The lights went out. Total darkness. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red, but nothing happened. The building, the entire section of the base, had gone black. In the darkness, Kaine moved. She'd spent 6 hours studying this room's layout through surveillance, knew where every piece of furniture sat, knew the distance from her position to the door, 12 feet, 4 steps if she moved fast. She moved faster. Her hand found Vic's rifle in the darkness, wrenched it sideways. The corporal's finger was still on the trigger. The weapon fired, muzzle flash illuminating the room in strobing snapshots. She saw Wade diving left, Stone reaching for his backup weapon, Shaw bringing his rifle around. Then darkness again. Kaine used the momentum from Vic's rifle to spin him, putting his body between her and Shaw's likely line of fire. Heard Shaw curse, unable to shoot without hitting his teammate. She drove her elbow into Vic's throat, felt cartilage crunch, released him and dropped. Rolled right. A burst of automatic fire tore through the space where she'd been standing. Wade, firing blind, hoping for a lucky hit. Kaine's hand found her dropped rifle. She came up shooting, aiming at muzzle flashes, 2 round bursts, professional and precise. Heard someone grunt in pain, couldn't tell who. Then boots in the hallway, multiple people, flashlights cutting through darkness, a voice she recognized. Everyone on the ground, now. Colonel Harding, backed by a squad of military police, weapons drawn and ready. The room froze. In the beam of flashlights, the scene resolved into clarity. Stone holding his wounded hand, blood dripping. Shaw with his rifle half raised, calculating odds and finding them poor. Wade on the ground, clutching his leg where Kaine's bullet had found meat. Vic gasping, holding his throat, unable to breathe properly. And Hale, still tied to the chair, conscious now and watching everything with the detached interest of someone who'd seen worse. Kaine stood slowly, rifle lowered but ready. Sir. Harding's expression was unreadable. Sergeant Kaine, you want to tell me what happened here? Before she could answer, Shaw moved. A blur of motion, faster than thought, rifle coming up toward Harding. Kaine's response was instinct, muscle memory, the countless hours of training that turned decision into action without conscious thought. She fired once. The bullet took Shaw in the shoulder, spinning him. His rifle clattered away. He hit the ground hard, clutching the wound, blood spreading across his uniform. The military police swarmed forward, securing all 4 suspects, zip-tying hands, checking weapons. Harding walked to Kaine, stood close enough that only she could hear. Nice timing on that last shot. Learned from the best, sir. David would be proud. Kaine felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd maintained for 4 years. She blinked hard, forced it back down. The mission wasn't over, not yet. Medical personnel arrived, began treating the wounded. Shaw would survive. So would Wade and Vic. Stone's hand was a mess, but battlefield medicine could work miracles. They'd all live long enough to face questioning, trial, whatever justice the military dispensed to traitors. Harding cut Hale free personally. The CIA man stood unsteadily, accepting a medic's support. He looked at Kaine for a long moment. "Thank you." She nodded, "Just doing my job." "Your job is protecting Harding. I was secondary. Everyone's primary if they're about to die." Hale smiled through split lips. "Hayes was right about you." The next hours blurred together. Interrogations, statements, technical specialists examining the communications tower, finding both the Russian transmitter and Hayes's listening device. The pieces falling into place with the inevitability of dominoes. Stone and his team had been recruited 18 months earlier. Promised money, new identities, comfortable retirement in Moscow. All they had to do was monitor Harding, report his movements, wait for the order to eliminate him. The order that would have come within days if Kaine hadn't exposed them. Shaw broke first, his shoulder wound and the realization that Russian promises meant nothing combining to crack his resolve. He confirmed what Kaine had suspected. General Volkov, now a powerful figure in Russian intelligence, had been running a long-term operation to eliminate everyone who knew about his son's death and the chemical weapons documents. David Kaine had been target number 6. Harding was meant to be number 7. Kaine herself had become number 8 when she'd started asking questions. But the network went deeper. Shaw provided names, American officials, defense contractors, people who'd profited from the chemical weapons sales and would profit again if the evidence stayed buried, people with resources, reach, and absolutely no conscience. Agent Hale, after receiving medical treatment and being cleared for duty, was quietly extracted back to the United States for debriefing. Hayes arranged secure transport, ensuring the CIA officer who'd risked everything in deep cover could finally return home. His testimony would prove crucial in the larger investigation, another piece of evidence in the conspiracy that reached far beyond a Syrian forward operating base. When dawn broke over Syria, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, Kaine sat alone on the roof of her quarters. Her rifle lay beside her, cleaned and oiled, ready, always ready. Harding found her there, climbed the ladder without asking permission, sat without waiting for invitation. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun climb. Finally Harding spoke. "Hayes called. Says you saved the entire operation. Says without you I'd be dead and this whole conspiracy would have stayed buried." "Just following orders, sir." "Bullshit. You went off script a dozen times, made decisions that could have gotten you killed or court-martialed. You didn't follow orders. You followed your conscience. There's a difference." Kaine was quiet. "Then, David taught me that. Said orders tell you what to do, conscience tells you what's right, and when they conflict, you better be prepared to live with your choice." "Smart man." "The best I knew." They watched the sunrise together. Finally, Harding asked the question that had been building since the briefing room confrontation. "What happens now?" Now, Kaine checked her rifle's chamber out of habit, found it empty, slid it closed. "Now we wait for Volkov's next move. Because Stone and his team were just one cell. There will be others, and Volkov won't stop until either he's dead or you are. So we keep fighting. Until one side gives up or bleeds out." "Yes, sir." Harding stood stretched, his joints popping. "I'm getting too old for this." "You're still breathing. That's all that matters." "Is it? Sometimes I wonder if staying alive is worth all the people who died to keep me that way. If whatever information I'm carrying is really worth that cost." Kaine stood as well, faced him directly. "Sir, it's not about the information anymore. It's about not letting them win, not letting them erase people like David Kaine from history, not letting power and money crush truth. That's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for. Harding studied her face. You really believe that? I have to, sir. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? He nodded slowly. Hayes wants you reassigned. Permanent protective detail. Says you've proven yourself beyond any doubt. And what do you want, sir? Harding looked out at the desert at the base, waking to another day of controlled chaos. I want to know that if I get killed, it'll be because the enemy was better, not because I was too proud to accept help. So yeah, I want you watching my back, for however long this takes. Understood, sir. One condition. Sir. Stop calling me sir when we're alone. We're past that now. Kaine almost smiled. What should I call you? Harding will do. Or James if you're feeling particularly informal. I'll stick with Harding. Fair enough. He moved toward the ladder. Get some rest, Kaine. Something tells me things are about to get worse before they get better. He climbed down. Kaine stayed on the roof, watching the day unfold. Somewhere out there, in Moscow or Damascus or somewhere in between, General Volkov was receiving reports about his failed operation, about the exposed cell, about the American sergeant who kept interfering with his plans. And he'd be adapting, planning, preparing the next move in a game that had been running for 13 years. Kaine checked her rifle again, loaded a magazine, chambered a round. The familiar weight and balance settled into her hands like greeting an old friend. Let him come, she thought. Let them all come. I'm David Kaine's daughter and I don't break. The sun continued its climb, indifferent to human schemes and violence. Just another day in a war that never seemed to end. Just another morning of choosing to stand when falling would be easier. Kaine closed her eyes, felt the sun on her face, remembered David Kaine's last words, "Don't cry for me. I died doing exactly what I was meant to do." She wouldn't cry, not yet, not while there was still work to be done, still people to protect, still memories to honor. When she opened her eyes again, the desert stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and terrible and vast, like the future, like the fight ahead. She was ready. 6 months after Syria, the world looked different. Rachel Kaine stood in Arlington National Cemetery on a morning when frost painted the grass silver and breath hung visible in December air. Row upon row of white headstones stretched toward a horizon obscured by winter mist. Somewhere among those markers, David Kaine rested beneath earth and memory. She'd come here every week since returning stateside, always alone, always at dawn, the ritual of remembering, the meditation of grief that never quite became acceptance. The headstone was simple: Master Sergeant David Kaine, dates of birth and death, a cross, no mention of how he died or why. The official record called it a training accident. The truth lived only in classified files and the memories of people who knew better. Kaine knelt, brushed frost from the carved letters. The stone was cold beneath her fingers, unyielding as the man it commemorated. "You'd be disappointed in me," she said softly. "I haven't cried yet. You always said tears were just pain finding its way out, but I think if I start, I won't stop." The cemetery offered no response, just whined through bare branches and the distant sound of traffic on the memorial bridge. Behind her, footsteps on frozen ground. She didn't turn. Knew the gait, the weight, the precise rhythm of someone who'd spent decades learning to move with purpose. Colonel James Harding stopped a respectful distance away, waited until she acknowledged him. "Morning, sir." "Harding, remember." She almost smiled. Old habits. He moved closer, looked down at David Kaine's headstone, I never met him. Did you know that? All those years he was protecting me, and I never even knew his name. He preferred it that way. Still, I'd like to have thanked him. Kaine stood, brushed frost from her knees. He didn't do it for thanks. He did it because someone had to. They stood together in silence. Around them, the cemetery slowly brightened as dawn pushed against darkness. Finally, Harding spoke. Hayes wants to see us, both of us, says it's time. Time for what? To finish it. The CIA safe house sat in the Virginia countryside, hidden among horse farms and old money estates. Nothing about it suggested federal operation. Just another renovated colonial with black shutters and a gravel driveway. But the security was sophisticated, layered, invisible to casual observation. Director Warren Hayes met them in a room that looked like someone's study. Leather chairs, bookshelves, a fireplace that actually worked, logs crackling and sending shadows dancing across walls. He gestured to seats. Thank you for coming. I know you both have questions. Kaine sat. Harding remained standing, too much nervous energy to contain. Hayes pulled a folder from his desk, opened it, slid photographs across the polished wood surface. General Alexei Volkov, 63 years old, currently serving as Deputy Director of Russian Foreign Intelligence, based in Moscow, protected by layers of security that make him effectively untouchable. So why show us his picture? Kaine asked. Because he's coming here, to the United States, in 2 weeks. Harding's expression sharpened. Why would he risk that? Hayes pulled out another photograph. This one showed an older American man in an expensive suit, shaking hands with foreign dignitaries. Senator Richard Harding, your brother, Colonel. James Harding's face went pale. What does Richard have to do with this? Everything. Hayes leaned back. Your brother is the reason Volkov has been hunting you for 13 years. He's the American signature on those chemical weapons transfers. He's the one who authorized the sale to Russian intermediaries. And when you killed Dmitry Volkov in Chechnya and recovered those documents, you became a threat to both of them. That's insane. Richard is a U.S. Senator. He chairs the Armed Services Committee, which gives him perfect access to military operations, personnel files, deployment schedules. Hayes pulled out more documents. He's been feeding Volkov information about your movements for over a decade. Every person who died protecting you, every accident that wasn't an accident, it all traces back to your brother. Kaine felt pieces clicking into place. That's why David Kaine's death was so clean. Senator Harding had access to training schedules, equipment manifests. He knew exactly when and how to strike. Harding looked like he'd been shot. My own brother has been trying to kill me for 13 years. Not trying to kill you, trying to isolate you, break you, make you paranoid and unstable so that when you finally died it would look like suicide or mental breakdown. A tragic end to a decorated career. Hayes's voice softened. But you proved harder to break than he anticipated. And then Sergeant Kaine started protecting you. That changed the equation. Why is Volkov coming here? Kaine asked. Because Senator Harding is dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. He has maybe 6 months. And before he dies, he wants to ensure the chemical weapons evidence is buried forever. He and Volkov have arranged a final meeting. 2 weeks from now, during the senator's 70th birthday celebration at his estate in Maryland. Let me guess. Kaine's voice was flat. They're going to tie up loose ends. Exactly. The senator has arranged for his brother to attend the party, a public reconciliation between estranged siblings. Very touching, very photographed. And sometime during that event, Colonel Harding will suffer a tragic accident. Fall downstairs, heart attack, something plausible. With him gone, the last witness to the Chechnya operation dies. The evidence dies with him. Harding's hands were shaking. You want me to go to my brother's party knowing he plans to kill me? No, Hayes closed the folder. I want you to go to that party and help us arrest both of them. We need Volkov on American soil, outside diplomatic immunity. We need your brother caught in the act of conspiracy with a foreign intelligence officer. And we need irrefutable evidence that ties them both to 13 years of murders. Kaine asked. Hayes looked at her directly. You've proven you can operate in hostile territory without being detected. You can infiltrate the estate, position yourself to observe and record the meeting between Volkov and Senator Harding. When they incriminate themselves, we move in. FBI, Justice Department, full federal response. No escape. No cover-up. You're asking a lot. Harding's voice was rough. You're asking me to help destroy my own brother. I'm asking you to choose between family and justice, between protecting a traitor and honoring the people who died because of him. Hayes stood. I won't lie and say it's an easy choice, but it's the right one. What if they kill me before you can move in? Then Sergeant Kaine will ensure they don't get away with it. Kaine met Hayes's eyes. You're putting a lot of faith in one person. David Kaine had faith in you. I'm betting he was right. 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and surveillance. The senator's estate sprawled across 200 acres of Maryland countryside, the main house an antebellum mansion that spoke of old Southern money and older secrets. Security for the party would be intense. Secret service for the senator and his political guests. Private contractors for perimeter control. Over 300 attendees expected, from politicians to foreign dignitaries to old family friends. Perfect cover for an assassination. Perfect cover for justice. Kaine studied blueprints until she could navigate the house blind. Memorized guard rotations, camera placements, the precise timing of patrol routes. The estate had been in the Harding family for 4 generations, which meant additions, renovations, modifications that created a labyrinth of rooms and corridors. She found her entry point on the 3rd day of surveillance, a service entrance used by catering staff, monitored by a single camera that had a blind spot lasting exactly 4 seconds during its rotation. 4 seconds to cross 15 feet and disappear into the servants' corridors. Tight, but manageable. Colonel Harding spent those 2 weeks looking like a man watching his own execution approach. He barely spoke, barely ate, just stared at photographs of his brother from decades earlier, back when they'd been close, before power and money had corrupted something that might have been love. The night before the operation, Kaine found him in the safe house library, surrounded by old photo albums. You should get some sleep, sir. Can't. Every time I close my eyes I see Richard, age 7, teaching me to fish, age 15 covering for me when I broke curfew, age 22 best man at my wedding. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. When did he become this person? Or was he always like this and I just didn't see it? Kaine sat across from him. People change. Or maybe they just reveal what was always there. Either way, the man in these photos isn't the man plotting your death. You're not betraying your brother. You're stopping a stranger who wears his face. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what David Kaine died for was just protecting one more corrupt politician instead of something that mattered. Harding closed the album. Tell me about him. Your foster father. What was he like? Kaine was quiet for a moment. Then, quiet, patient. He never raised his voice, never got angry, but you knew when you disappointed him because he'd get this look, like you'd failed to be the person he knew you could become. She smiled faintly. He taught me to shoot when I was 12. Said every person should know how to protect themselves and others. Said a weapon was just a tool, no different than a hammer or a saw. What mattered was the intent behind it. Sounds like a good man. The best I knew. He saved me, you know. I was in 4 different foster homes before him. Angry kid with a record, nobody wanted me, but he took me in, gave me structure, purpose. Showed me that discipline wasn't punishment, it was freedom. She paused. I'd be dead or in prison without him. So when I found out he died protecting you, I had 2 choices. Hate you for being alive when he wasn't, or finish what he started. And you chose to finish it. Not immediately. I spent a year hating you, hating the world. Then Hayes showed me the video, David's last message, and I realized hate was just another kind of prison, so I chose something else. What? Purpose? They sat in silence after that. Outside, wind moved through bare trees. Inside, the fire burned low, shadows deepening. Finally, Harding spoke. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if they kill me, promise me something. Sir? Promise me you'll make sure the truth comes out. Not for me, for David, for all the others who died. Make sure their names mean something. Kaine met his eyes. I promise. The night of the party arrived with unseasonable warmth. A false spring in late December that made the frost melt and the grounds turn to mud. Limousines rolled up the circular drive, depositing guests in evening wear who laughed and air kissed and pretended their lives held meaning beyond accumulation and appearance. Kaine watched from the woods beyond the estate's perimeter, dressed in black tactical gear, face painted to break up her outline. Her rifle lay beside her, zeroed for distances up to 1,200 meters. The estate's main ballroom glowed with light, visible through tall windows. Inside, Senator Richard Harding moved among his guests, playing the gracious host while cancer ate him from within. Somewhere in that crowd was General Volkov, traveling under diplomatic cover, protected by treaties and international protocol. And somewhere else, Colonel James Harding was arriving, dressed in his formal service uniform, preparing to shake his brother's hand and smile for cameras while wearing a wire that transmitted every word to FBI vans parked a mile away. Kaine's radio crackled, Hayes's voice encrypted and secure. Overwatch, this is command. Colonel is entering the estate. Volkov confirmed inside, second floor study. Your window opens in 20 minutes. Copy, moving to position. She rose from concealment, moved through the woods with the fluid silence of deep water. The service entrance appeared exactly as blueprinted. The camera rotated on its preset path. She counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. She crossed the gap and was inside. The servants' corridors were narrow, lit by dim bulbs, smelling of polish and old wood. Kaine moved through them like smoke, avoiding the catering staff rushing back and forth with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. She reached the stairwell she'd memorized, climbed to the second floor, emerged into a hallway lined with portraits of Harding ancestors who stared down with the judgment of the long dead. The study was at the end of the hall, door closed but not locked. Through the crack beneath, light spilled, voices too low to distinguish words. Kaine pulled out a fiber optic camera, slid it under the door gap. The image on her phone screen showed Senator Richard Harding behind a massive oak desk. Thin, almost skeletal, but his eyes burned with the fever of someone determined to control the world even as his body betrayed him. Across from him sat General Alexei Volkov, older than his photograph suggested, gray threading through dark hair, face lined by decades of secrets and violence. He wore an expensive suit, American cut, nothing to suggest his true identity. Senator Harding's voice came through clearly. The recording device Kaine had planted in the study's ventilation system during her pre-operation reconnaissance, picking up every word. My brother arrives in 10 minutes. You're certain your people can make it look accidental? Volkov's English carried only the faintest accent. "We've done this 12 times already. One more won't pose difficulties. A fall down the main staircase. Head trauma. Very tragic. The decorated colonel attending his estranged brother's party as an olive branch, dying in a senseless accident." His voice held amusement, almost poetic. "The chemical weapons documents. You're certain they died with Dmitri? Your brother recovered copies, but he never understood their significance, never connected the signatures to real people. We've monitored him for 13 years. If he'd known, he would have acted." The general leaned back. "Once he's dead, the last witness is eliminated. The investigation from 2011 stays closed. We can move forward with the new transfers." Senator Harding coughed, a wet sound that spoke of failing lungs. "I won't live to see them completed." "But your legacy will." Volkov paused. "Your son has been briefed. He understands his role in the Defense Department. The contracts will continue. The profits will flow. And when the time comes, he'll ensure the evidence stays buried." Kaine's blood ran cold. The conspiracy didn't end with the senator's death. His son, positioned in the Pentagon, would carry the operation forward. Another generation of corruption, another layer of betrayal that would outlive everyone in this room. She adjusted her recording equipment, ensuring every word was captured. This confession wasn't just about stopping tonight's assassination. It was about dismantling an entire network. Outside the study, footsteps approached. Heavy, multiple people. Kaine withdrew the camera, melted into an alcove as Secret Service agents passed, escorting Colonel Harding toward the study. The colonel looked composed, calm, but Kaine could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was walking toward his brother knowing that brother wanted him dead. The courage that required defied measurement. The agents opened the study door. Senator Harding rose, arms extended, face arranged in an expression of brotherly love that might have fooled anyone who didn't know better. "James, I'm so glad you came." The two brothers embraced. Cameras flashed as a photographer captured the moment. The reconciliation of the Harding brothers, a feel-good story for the evening news. No one watching would guess one of them was a traitor and the other was about to die. The Secret Service withdrew, closing the door. Now it was 3 men in a room, 2 who knew the truth, 1 who thought he did. Kaine shifted position, found a ventilation grate that gave her a direct line of sight into the study. Through the slats, she could see everything. Colonel Harding looked at Volkov, didn't extend his hand, didn't acknowledge the general except with his eyes. "General Volkov, I didn't expect to see you here." The general smiled. "Your brother and I have business interests in common: arms development, international security, profitable ventures." 13 years of profitable ventures. Colonel Harding's voice stayed level, long enough to see a lot of people die. Senator Harding moved between them. "James, this isn't the time." "No, when is the time, Richard? When is the right moment to discuss how you've been selling chemical weapons to Russian intermediaries? How you've been orchestrating murders to cover your tracks? How you killed the people I trusted to protect me?" The senator's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Colonel Harding pulled out a photograph, slid it across the desk. "Master Sergeant David Kaine died 4 years ago in a training accident, except it wasn't an accident. Someone swapped his rifle's firing pin. Someone with access to training schedules and armory logs. Someone like you." Senator Harding didn't look at the photo. "James, you're clearly unwell. The stress of deployment, PTSD, it affects people." "Don't," the colonel's voice cut like a blade, "don't you dare use my service against me. I've spent 13 years thinking I was losing my mind, watching friends die, wondering if I was cursed. And all along it was you, my own brother, selling out your country for money and power." Volkov stood, hand moving inside his jacket. "Colonel, I think you should leave." "FBI, don't move." The voice came from the door as it crashed open. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Volkov froze. Senator Harding collapsed into his chair, all color draining from his face. Hayes appeared in the doorway, badge displayed. "General Alexei Volkov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and espionage." "Senator Richard Harding, you're under arrest for the same charges plus treason." He looked at Colonel Harding. "You can step back now, Colonel. We have everything we need." James Harding looked at his brother. Really looked, maybe for the first time in decades. Saw not family but a stranger. Not love but calculation. The man who'd taught him to fish and covered for him and stood beside him at his wedding was gone. Had been gone for years, maybe. Replaced by something hollow and hungry. "Why?" The colonel's voice was barely a whisper. "We had everything, respect, legacy. Why throw it away for money?" Senator Harding met his eyes, because respect doesn't buy immortality. Legacy doesn't cure cancer, but power does. Power makes you untouchable. He coughed again, or it should have. Agents moved forward, handcuffing both men. Volkov remained silent, face impassive, already calculating legal angles and diplomatic escape routes. Senator Harding just looked tired, diminished, a dying man watching his last gambit fail. Hayes nodded to Colonel Harding. "We need your statement, but first step outside. You don't need to see this." The colonel walked out on shaking legs. The door closed behind him. Kaine waited in the alcove until the study emptied, until agents led the prisoners away and the house fell into organized chaos. Then she slipped back through the servants' corridors, out the service entrance, into the night. She was halfway to the perimeter when her radio crackled. "Kaine, this is Hayes. Good work, come in for debrief." She almost answered, almost followed protocol, but something stopped her. The weight of the evening, maybe. The sight of a family destroyed by greed. The reminder that trust was currency few could afford. "Negative," she transmitted. "Mission complete. Going dark for 72 hours. Will contact when ready." "Kaine, that's not." She turned off the radio, kept walking. 3 days later, Kaine sat in a diner outside Roanoke, Virginia. The kind of place where coffee came in chipped mugs and the pie was actually homemade. She was halfway through her second cup when Colonel Harding slid into the booth across from her. They'd never discussed a meeting, never made plans, but somehow she'd known he'd find her. Same way she'd known where to find this place that felt safe without being obvious. "You disappeared. Hayes is worried." Hayes worries professionally. I needed time to think. "About?" Kaine looked out the window at traffic passing on the interstate. "Whether any of this mattered. We stopped your brother, arrested Volkov, exposed the conspiracy. But there are others, always others. How many more operations like this before we run out of people willing to stand in the gap?" Harding was quiet for a moment. David never talked about that, the endless nature of it, how one mission becomes 10, becomes 100. Because he knew the alternative was worse, letting the darkness win unchallenged. She turned back to face him. "Your brother is dying. Cancer will kill him before trial ends. The lawyers are already arguing jurisdiction, diplomatic complications. Volkov will probably negotiate some kind of exchange, go back to Russia, live out his days drinking vodka and congratulating himself on a career well played, and will just move on to the next crisis, the next threat. Does it ever actually end?" Harding reached across the table, picked up her coffee mug, took a sip despite it being hers, made a face at how she took it, black and bitter. "No, it doesn't end, but that's not the point." Then what is? He set the mug down carefully. The point is we showed up. We did the job. We honored the people who died by making sure their deaths meant something. David Kaine didn't sacrifice himself so his daughter could give up when things got hard. He did it so she'd have the chance to keep fighting. Kaine felt something crack in her chest. The wall she'd built to keep grief contained. 4 years of holding back tears. 4 years of pretending strength meant never breaking. A tear ran down her cheek, then another. She wiped them away angrily. Harding reached out, gripped her hand. "It's okay. You can cry. He'd want you to." "I don't know how." "Sure you do. You just let go." And then she was crying. Really crying. 4 years of grief pouring out in shaking sobs while Colonel James Harding held her hand and let her break because sometimes breaking was the only way to become whole again. When the storm passed, she wiped her eyes, looked at him. "Sorry." "Don't be. I've been waiting for you to crack since Syria. Figured it would happen eventually." She almost laughed. "Always knew you were secretly waiting for me to fail." "Not fail, just be human." They sat in silence after that. The diner hummed with normal life. People eating, talking, living small dramas that wouldn't make history books but mattered infinitely to them. Finally, Kaine spoke. "Hayes wants me for permanent protective detail. Says you requested it." "I did. Figure if you're going to watch my back anyway, might as well make it official." "I'm not easy to work with." "Neither am I. Should be interesting." She smiled, a real one this time. "When do we start?" "Already started. The moment you pulled me out of that study instead of letting Volkov shoot me. We're partners now, whether you like it or not." 6 months after that, Kaine stood at Arlington Cemetery again. Dawn light filtered through winter branches. Frost painted the grass silver, but this time she wasn't alone. Harding stood beside her looking down at David Kaine's headstone. He'd brought flowers, simple ones, nothing elaborate. "I know I'm late, but I wanted to thank him for everything." Kaine nodded. He'd have appreciated that. Harding laid the flowers at the base of the stone, stood, saluted, held it for a full minute while morning brightened around them. When he finished, they walked together toward the cemetery gates. Behind them, row upon row of white markers stretched into mist. The honored dead, the ones who'd chosen service over safety, duty over comfort. Kaine's phone buzzed, a message from Hayes. "New situation developing. Asset needs extraction. High risk. Are you available?" She looked at Harding. He looked back. They both knew the answer before she typed it. "Always." They left Arlington together, heading toward whatever crisis waited, whatever impossible situation needed operators to resolve. The work never ended. The darkness never stopped pushing, but neither did they. Because some people were built different. Some people heard the call and answered even knowing the cost. Some people became the thin line between chaos and order, not because they wanted glory or recognition, but because someone had to stand in that space. David Kaine had stood there. Colonel James Harding had stood there. And now Rachel Kaine stood there too, carrying forward a legacy built on sacrifice and silence. Years later, when people asked her about her service, about the classified operations and redacted missions, she'd just smile and say she did her job. Nothing more, nothing less. But those who knew, those who'd served beside her or been protected by her, they understood the truth. Rachel Kaine wasn't just a soldier. She was an operator, a guardian, a promise kept across generations. And in the dark places where evil thought itself untouchable, where corrupt men made plans they believed would never be challenged, her name became something whispered with fear and respect. The one who never missed, the one who never quit, David Kaine's daughter. And she was always watching. The end came not with thunder but with silence. 4 years after Senator Harding died in federal prison, his cancer winning the race against justice. 3 years after Volkov was exchanged in a prisoner swap, returning to Russia, where he died 6 months later under circumstances the Kremlin refused to discuss. 2 years after Agent Victor Hale published a book under a pseudonym, revealing just enough truth to matter without compromising ongoing operations. Rachel Kaine retired from active service at 42, not because she was broken or tired, but because Hayes convinced her that teaching the next generation was as important as fighting the current war. She took a position at Fort Bragg, training snipers, teaching them not just to shoot but to think, to see 3 moves ahead, to understand that the weapon was just a tool and what mattered was the intent behind it. Her students called her Frost, said she could appear and disappear like winter wind, said she never missed, said she'd done things in Syria and Moscow and places that didn't have names that would never be declassified. She neither confirmed nor denied, just taught them to breathe, to aim, to carry the burden of the trigger with honor and conscience. Colonel James Harding retired the same year. They bought houses 3 miles apart in the Virginia countryside, close enough to have coffee every morning, far enough to maintain the illusion of independence. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on one porch or the other, watching the sun set, talking about old missions and older friends. Sometimes Hayes would join them, older now but still sharp, still running operations that kept the darkness at bay. They never talked about the impossible shot, the 2,340-meter kill in Damascus that had never officially happened, the shot that had taken down a terrorist leader and changed the trajectory of an entire war. They never talked about the conspiracy that had reached the Senate itself, about families destroyed by greed, about the price of keeping secrets. They just sat in comfortable silence and watched the light fade, 3 operators who'd chosen to keep living even after the missions ended. And sometimes, on those evenings when the wind was right and the shadows grew long, Kaine would feel David Kaine's presence. Not supernatural, just memory, the echo of a voice that had taught her everything that mattered. Don't shoot to prove something, Ellie. Shoot to connect. She'd proven plenty, connected more than she could count, saved lives by taking them, protected the innocent by eliminating the guilty, walked the razor edge between duty and conscience for 20 years. And now, in the quiet of retirement, she finally understood what David Kaine had tried to teach her all along. It was never about the shooting, never about the missions or the medals or the classified files that would stay sealed for 50 years. It was about standing in the space between darkness and light, about being willing to carry the weight so others didn't have to, about choosing service over safety every single day. That was the real directive, the one that transcended orders and politics and the endless cycles of violence. Be the operator that protects, be the silence that speaks louder than bullets, be the promise kept across generations. And she had been, God help her, she had been. On the day Rachel Kaine turned 60, she returned to Arlington Cemetery one final time. David Kaine's headstone looked smaller than she remembered, weather-worn, but the letters were still clear. She knelt, touched the stone, spoke words only the dead could hear. I kept the promise, Harding's still alive, the conspiracies exposed, the ones who died are honored, you can rest now. And maybe he could. Maybe they all could, all those who died protecting something larger than themselves. Maybe in whatever came after, they looked down and saw that their sacrifices hadn't been wasted, that the light they'd fought for still burned. Rachel Kaine stood, saluted, held it until her arm ached. Then she turned and walked away, leaving flowers and memories behind, carrying forward only the lessons that mattered. The world kept turning, darkness kept pushing, but somewhere out there, new operators were being trained, new guardians taking up the watch, new voices learning to whisper the old truths. Some things never end, they just change hands. And that was enough. That was everything. What would you do if the person hunting you for 13 years was your own brother? Rachel Kaine didn't just survive the impossible. She became a legend the hard way. No shortcuts, no luck, just pure skill and grit that would make David proud. That 1,900-meter shot in total darkness, just the beginning. Drop a comment. Have you ever had to choose between family and doing what's right? These stories hit different when you've served. New episodes weekly. Subscribe so you don't miss how this really ends. What part shocked you most?